It all started on a rainy October evening when my car broke down on a desolate country road. My name's Jack, and I was driving home from a work trip when the weather turned. The sky was an inky black, with rain pounding against my windshield, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The GPS had guided me onto a dirt road I hadn't noticed before. The road twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the woods. The trees loomed over me, their branches clawing at the car like skeletal fingers. The deeper I went, the eerier it became. The only sound was the relentless patter of rain on the roof. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog that was starting to roll in. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a flickering street lamp in the distance. It was the only sign of civilization I'd seen for miles. Relieved, I pulled over and saw an old, weathered sign barely legible through the rain. Welcome to Everwood. I parked the car and stepped out into the downpour, hoping to find somewhere warm and dry. The town was eerily quiet. No streetlights, no cars, just the steady rhythm of rain. I approached the nearest building, an old inn with a vacancy sign swinging loosely in the wind. The paint was peeling and the windows were fogged up. I pushed open the creaky door. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the musty odor of long-standing neglect. The lobby was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The floor was covered in an old worn rug and the reception desk was empty. I hesitated before ringing the bell on the counter. An elderly woman appeared from a back room. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles and her eyes were an unsettling shade of gray. She regarded me with a cold, disinterested stare. "Evening," I said, trying to sound cheerful despite the growing unease. I was hoping to get a room for the night. The woman nodded slowly and handed me a key without speaking. She didn't provide any information about the inn or the town, just gestured toward the stairs. I thanked her and took the key, heading up to the second floor. The hallway was just as grim as the lobby, with peeling wallpaper and flickering lights. I found my room, room 13, which seemed oddly fitting given the night's events. The room was sparsely furnished, a bed with a threadbare blanket, a small wooden table, and a single chair. The window overlooked the darkened town, with the rain still beating against the glass. I tried to shake off the sense of foreboding that clung to me and settled into bed. Sleep was elusive. The rain pounded against the window, and the wind howled through the gaps in the old walls. Every creak and groan of the building seemed amplified in the silence, and shadows danced along the walls cast by the weak light of the lamp. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a strange sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping. It came from the window like someone, or something, was gently rapping on the glass. I sat up, heart racing, and peered into the darkness outside. The rain had stopped, but a dense fog had rolled in, obscuring everything. I saw nothing but the inky blackness of the forest. I lay back down, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But then the tapping started again, louder this time, more insistent. I got out of bed and went to the window. As I looked out, I saw shapes moving in the fog, dark, shadowy figures that seemed to flit in and out of view. My breath caught in my throat. The figures were too indistinct to make out clearly, but they were definitely moving, shifting shapes in the dense fog. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding. I wanted to leave, but I had no idea where to go. The inn seemed to be the only building for miles. I tried to distract myself, turning on the small TV in the corner. Static filled the screen. I flipped through the channels, but all I got was a fuzzy, distorted image that seemed to pulse and shift. Then came the noise, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from within the walls. I froze, listening. The growl grew louder, more persistent, until it seemed to reverberate through the room. I tried to convince myself it was just the old building settling, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. I decided to investigate, thinking perhaps I could find the source of the noise and put my mind at ease. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and stepped out into the hallway. The hall was dark and silent, the only sound my footsteps echoing off the walls. The growling continued, now accompanied by a scratching sound as if something was trying to claw its way through the walls. I followed the noise down the hallway, each step heavy with dread. I reached the end of the hall and saw a door slightly ajar. The noise was louder here, almost deafening. I pushed the door open and was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. The room was a storage closet, filled with old cleaning supplies and broken furniture, but what caught my eye was a small, grimy mirror on the wall. In the reflection, I saw something that made me gasp, a dark, shadowy figure standing right behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. There was nothing there. My heart raced as I looked back at the mirror. The figure was still there. Closer now, its face a twisted, amorphous mass of darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine as the growling grew louder, more frantic. I fled the room, my footsteps pounding against the wooden floor as I ran back to my own room. I locked the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to calm my breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. The noises continued, whispers in the dark, faint scratching sounds, and the occasional guttural growl. I felt trapped in a nightmare that wouldn't end. At dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my things quickly and went downstairs, determined to leave. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen, and I let myself out into the misty morning. I drove out of Everwood as fast as I could, my nerves on edge. The fog was still thick, making it difficult to see. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those shadowy figures following me. It wasn't until I reached the main road that I finally felt a sense of relief. The fog began to lift, and the sunlight started to break through. I looked back one last time, and for a moment, I thought I saw a dark figure standing by the side of the road, watching me as I drove away. Weeks later, I thought I had finally put the experience behind me. But one night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something strange, a shadow in my hallway. It was a dark, indistinct shape, just like the ones I saw in Everwood. It moved with a life of its own, shifting and stretching as if it were alive. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but the feeling of dread was unmistakable. The growls from Everwood echoed in my mind, and the whispers began again, barely audible, coming from the darkness. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside seemed amplified. I felt like I was being watched, hunted by something I couldn't see. Then, late in the night, the door to my bedroom creaked open. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as I saw a shadowy figure enter the room. It was the same dark shape I had seen in Everwood, its featureless face glowing with an eerie light. It moved closer, and I could hear the guttural growl once more, right next to my ear. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure loomed over me, its presence suffocating, and just as it reached out toward me, I was jolted awake. Sweat drenched my body, and I was alone in my room, the shadows of the night receding as the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains. I tried to convince myself it was all a nightmare, a product of my overactive imagination and the stress of the past few weeks. But deep down, I knew the truth. Everwood wasn't done with me. The shadows had followed me, and whatever malevolent force resided in that cursed town was now a part of my life. The nightmares didn't stop. Each night, I was haunted by the same shadowy figure, the same guttural growl, and the same oppressive darkness. I tried to get help, but no one seemed to understand. My friends thought it was stress or a bad reaction to the events of the trip. I began to notice changes in my own behavior. I was more anxious, irritable, and paranoid. The shadows in my house seemed to grow darker, more menacing. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind sent me into a state of panic. I started avoiding mirrors, afraid of seeing the dark figure lurking behind me. One night I woke up to find my house in complete darkness. The power was out, and the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own. I heard the growl again, louder and closer than ever. I tried to call for help, but my phone was dead. The only sound was the growling and the faint whisper of something moving in the dark. I decided to leave the house, hoping that getting away would break the curse. I grabbed a flashlight and ventured outside into the cold, damp night. The fog was back, thicker than ever. I walked through the woods, hoping to find someone, anyone who could help. The forest was silent, except for the sound of my footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. The shadows seemed to move with me, closing in as I walked. I stumbled through the trees, the growling growing louder, more frantic. I felt something brushing against my skin, something cold and slimy. I came across an old abandoned house deep in the forest. It looked like something out of a horror movie. Broken windows, overgrown vines, and a sagging roof. Desperate for shelter, I entered the house. Inside, the air was musty and stale, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. The growling was now a roar, echoing through the empty rooms. The shadows danced on the walls, twisting and turning as if alive. I tried to find a place to hide, but the shadows seemed to follow me, closing in tighter and tighter. I found a small closet and squeezed inside, trying to calm my racing heart. The growling was deafening now, and the shadows seemed to press against the door. I could feel the cold, damp breath of whatever was out there seeping through the cracks. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was hard to tell. I was trapped in that closet, the growling and whispering never ceasing. I knew I had to get out, but the shadows were everywhere, blocking my way. When I finally mustered the courage to leave the closet, the house was eerily quiet. The shadows had retreated, and the growling had stopped. I made my way back to the entrance, my flashlight barely illuminating the path. I left the house and stumbled through the forest, the fog still thick around me. When I finally reached the main road, I collapsed in exhaustion. A passing car stopped to help me, and I was taken to the nearest town. I haven't been back to Everwood since that night. The nightmares have faded, but the sense of dread remains. I can't shake the feeling that the shadows are still following me, lurking just out of sight. Sometimes, when the fog rolls in and the night grows still, I can hear the faint growl, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lies just beyond the edge of our world.